All right, welcome. Welcome to How to Automate Zoom Account Provisioning, hosted by Exclamation Labs and Evolveum. We're excited to have you today, and thanks for joining us. So we're going to learn a little bit about Zoom account provisioning and deprovisioning and how midPoint can help with that. This webinar is going to be a little bit of a technical deep dive of the capabilities of the Zoom platform, what you can do through the APIs and what you can do through midPoint and the connector that we've open sourced and put out in the community. So just a little housekeeping, this session will be recorded. Additionally, the slide deck that we're going to walk through for this demonstration will be available. So after this meeting, we will send out an email to everybody that attended with a link to both of those. So in case you miss anything, you can download it and check it out at your leisure. Also, I'd like to mention that we do have a question panel. Due to the way that the webinar format works on the GoToWebinar, we'll be taking questions via the questions panel only, and we'll try to address those at the end mainly, but if there's something that comes in that we see that needs addressed right away, we may be able to take that opportunity at that time. So at this time, I'd like to just do some quick introductions. So I'm Andrew Cope, Chief Technology Officer here at Exclamation Labs. Also on our session today, we'll have Jim Lookaball, who's the IM Solutions Engineer here, who'll be doing most of the technical presentation today, and Slavik Leishammer from Evolveum, who's Identity Engineer. Definitely strong and familiar with the higher education kind of focus that you might see a little bit of a trend towards today. So for those of you who may not be too familiar with Exclamation Labs and Evolveum, well, for one, Evolveum is the creator of midPoint, the open source, identity governance system that we're talking about today. And it also supports many types of industries: higher ed, corporate, government, financial sector, and beyond. And many companies utilize midPoint, obviously. So Exclamation Labs, we're integration partners, implementation partners with Evolveum. We do a lot in the fintech space and a little bit in the higher ed now. And we help a lot of our clients with midPoint long-term support. So this year is our 25th year as a company or as an agency. So, we really look forward to helping communities such as yourself. And also, we're excited to kind of work with the internet too and start participating in that community as well for any folks involved with that might be on the line. So that said, I want to get into a little bit about kind of the capabilities of Zoom, talk a little bit about how that might work in higher ed, and some of the different types of things that you'll see in Zoom. So one of the first things that I kind of want to talk about are the different types of accounts in Zoom. So there's kind of 4 levels of account types that you can have. You'll have the first account type that you might have experienced is that the basic or free level of account that anybody can go sign up for. Of course, there is some limitations with the free version of the account that we'll get into kind of the comparison here in a minute. But there's additionally a pro account level, business and enterprise level, again, added features, and then an education level, which is kind of has a little bit better licensing fee for higher education. Actually, not just higher education, but all education facilities. Each account can have 3 different roles in Zoom. So there's kind of 3 main role types that Zoom supports. Now keep in mind there's 2 different concepts of grouping accounts that we'll get into here in a minute. With Zoom also has the notion of groups, but this is specifically called roles in Zoom. There are owner accounts. Again, that's maybe the person that creates an organizational type account. They have access to everything. You have administrative level accounts that are mainly for managing users, connectivity, organizing the way that Zoom operates within an organization, and then just the basic member accounts, which have no administrative privileges. Generally, they're basic users. Now, those can also apply to the various account types above in different ways. So the next thing I would like to get into are the types of users. So again, we have those basic users, as we mentioned above or previously. basic accounts have a 40-minute meeting limit. If they start the meeting, there's a 40-minute limit. If someone from a licensed account starts a meeting and a basic user joins, that limit does not apply. So this is for people that start meetings. They have no access to some of those advanced features. Now, in a licensed account, that's somebody that's paying Zoom for that account. They can host those meetings. They can do custom meeting IDs. They can use some of the add-ons, schedule meetings and whatnot. And then there's an on-prem type solution for larger organizations, enterprises, or higher ed. So the next thing I want to get into is probably a comparison of the roles versus the groups and how those concepts kind of differ in Zoom. If you remember, as I said, that roles are for basically permission sets within the Zoom platform itself, but groups are kind of for permission sets that you can create and manage what permissions or entitlements you want to have inside of those groups. So they can be used for many things. For example, if you're an education facility, you may want to separate staff accounts and student accounts, or maybe you would like to group students by what class that they're in, or however you'd like to divide and conquer with groups. You can organize your accounts in Zoom that way. The more important reason why you might want to do that is you can assign different capabilities to groups, and users that fall into those groups can then, of course, have those varying capabilities. And one big example that we see used prominently is HIPAA compliance. And for those not in the US, HIPAA compliance is our law around data sharing for patient data, medical data, and personal information of that nature. So one of the concerns in the US around anybody that might have an interaction with a doctor-patient interaction, or just a medical provider-patient interaction, is sharing that data. So if you're a higher education institution that has medical students that may meet with patients, real patients, you may not want them to be able to record that call, because then that could open up a potential breach or a potential thing that might need to be audited, because it might you might have captured patient information on the Zoom cloud as a recording. So a simple solution is to just place those people that might start meetings with patients into a HIPAA group and disallow recording, for example. So that's one very important reason to be able to manage groups within Zoom. So the next thing I would like to do is turn this over to Slavik, and he's going to talk a little bit about how higher ed specifically can utilize some of the functionality that exists today with this connectivity. Slavik?
Thank you, Andrew. So I will be speaking about how higher education is typically managing accounts in Zoom, and quite a natural way is used so-called just-in-time provisioning, because most of the higher education institutions have already the SSO single sign-on configured, usually using Shibboleth software with someone to support, but of course you can use any other software with someone to support, and this Zoom already supports directly. So it works in a way when the user is signing in, the attributes are passed as a standard thing of the Subnet protocol, and based on that, Zoom will automatically create account and configure proper license and attributes and so on. And if some higher education institution is small, they might be even still creating Zoom accounts manually. If of course it's possible, but you probably don't want to do it forever. Problem with this approach, and especially with this just-in-time provisioning, is you have no easy way how to deprovision the accounts automatically. So the usual approach to this is really have manual process. So have a person who is from time to time checking all the accounts there and either removing licenses or delete the whole account. But what we really need is to fully automate this process, and mostly about because you want to remove unused licenses and save some money for it. So what are the options for it? I want to talk about different methods of provisioning and deprovisioning accounts. So I already explained Justintime, which starts with user signing in to service provider, which is Zoom in this case. And as a part of the sign-in process, all necessary attributes are processed and account is created manually. But the problem is with that you have no way to deprovision, because all updates or even deprovisioning can be done only when user is trying to sign in. But usually users who are not active in your university anymore, they won't sign in again to Zoom, so the Zoom know the updates and attributes and know it should deprovision or disable the account. So this cannot work. So for that, we have so-called just-in-case provisioning, sometimes also called pre-provisioning, which requires you to have some identity management system which has stored all your users and your roles, and you have configuration there saying exactly which users or members of which group or role should have access on Zoom. And then identity management will create the accounts automatically. And also if there's any change, it will update the account. And if you decide to configure identity management that some users shouldn't have account anymore, it will be automatically deleted. And with this approach, actually, we built or with Exclamation Labs to be more proper with our consultation, built a Zoom connector, which we will be talking in the next section of our presentation. And I will start with midPoint, which was already mentioned. And midPoint is the identity management which is used as a host for this connector. And I expect most of you already know midPoint and what is it capable. But if there are some people who might be new into midPoint, I will just give a short introduction. midPoint is identity management and also identity governance system. And its main feature is to be able to synchronize all your identity and other objects, your roles, your organization structure from your system, gather it everything inside midPoint to one place. Then you can create some rules and other configuration and configure provisioning to other system. And midPoint will make sure that all the configuration and all your accounts are everywhere as you configure it. And with this, I'm passing word back to Andrew, who will speak a bit about the Zoom connector and its functionality.
So thank you, Slavik. Actually, I'm going to turn this over to Jim Lookable, if you want to take this one.
Yeah, thank you, fellas. Andrew and Slavik, I appreciate that. Good setup. So for the Zoom connector that we'll be demonstrating in a short while in our webinar today, the Zoom connector is an example of Evolveum's connector structure used within midPoint, and that in turn is an enhancement on the ConID framework. And the enhancements help ease connector implementation and deployment. So it's a great approach and model to follow, and the Zoom connector follows it. So we'll see that example here today. The resource connector for midPoint can be cloned and built as per the instructions that you'll find at the GitHub link provided in this slide, right under that Zoom connector bullet there. So let me sort of give you a hint as to what you'll see. I'm not going to actually demonstrate cloning the repository and doing a build, because frankly, I found that when I took a recording of myself doing it, it's not terribly interesting to watch. So let me just describe to you how that works. And it's very straightforward. On the page for the repository, you'll find sections called Introductory Notes and Getting Started. And they offer the steps necessary for getting your connector in midPoint to integrate with your own Zoom presence. What you'll do first after doing the clone, you'll do a Gradle build, and then the target artifact is going to be a single jar file that you'll find in the build/libs directory. And you'll place that file in your midPoint deployments ICF connectors folder, and then restart midPoint. Voila, you'll have a Zoom connector ready to go to add and configure for your own midPoint instance. Now that jar file is just one of two important files. The second one is the configuration file, and there's an example in the repository that you'd clone. And within that configuration file are just a few configuration parameters. And arguably, the two most important ones are going to convey the credentials for establishing your own connection context to your Zoom presence. So to find out what values you need to place in those config parameters, you'll go to your Zoom presence, and if you look up under the solutions menu, you can choose marketplace. And then when in-app marketplace, and if you don't log in straight away, just go ahead and do so. But when in-app marketplace, you're going to select your JWT type app. And if you don't have one yet, go ahead and create one. It's pretty straightforward. But once you've selected your JWT type app, on the left side, there'll be a menu option for app credentials. And in there is where you'll find these two values I'm talking about, the two most important ones that you'll want for your config file in midPoint. And that is something you'll see as the API key. So the API key's value you'll use and set as the JWT issuer inside that connector config file. And the second one is called API secret. So you'll place that file in the config file's JWT secret parameter. The file needs to be made available and readable by midPoint, so it's going to have to reside somewhere that midPoint can access it. So no matter where it is, copy that path. And then within midPoint, when you go to create and configure your brand new Zoom connector, there's a sole configuration option right on the config step, and that's called the Zoom config file path. So you'll paste the path right in there, and you are now up and running with your own Zoom connector in midPoint. We'll see that illustration of using the midPoint Zoom connector in just a short while, but before we get there, I'm going to hand it back to Slavik.
Thank you, Jim. Now I will explain a bit of benefits of using Zoom connector. And the main feature there is really being able to automate completely your provisioning and deprovisioning processes. So you can eliminate this error-prone manual process that I described before. So there is no longer need to have a person doing some manual steps. And of course, if you have such a process, there's always room for human errors. So eliminating it completely automated will, of course, reduce cost of operating the Zoom service for you. And moreover, you can cut down cost on your unused licenses, because with automated deprovisioning, any license which are no longer needed will be also deprovisioned from the Zoom, so the Zoom knows it's no longer needed, and therefore you can really save money on this. And this might be especially useful if we are using already mentioned HIPAA groups, where as I understand, the license costs might be quite heavy as you have a lot of licenses. So with this, you can automate the process and use only exact amount licenses that you need. Another kind of a side effect of having the Zoom connector is that you enable some deeper integration with the identity management system. And on the next slide, I have some examples of it. And first of them is license management. So actually, midPoint is able to help you managing your license. So you can, for example, configure how many licenses you have available, and midPoint can either enforce it, so it won't allow you to assign more licenses that you have configured, or you might use it just for the notification and, for example, let midPoint notify you when you are reaching the critical limit and maybe it's time to buy more licenses for your use. Also, you can use some complex rule for authorization. So either you can have some really complex rule who should have license and who not, or you can delegate this somehow. So you can have manual licenses management delegated to some people responsible, and you can, for example, combine it with other features like approvals. So if you take the time and configure it, your users can, for example, really request license, and there will be an approval workflow, and someone will approve, and then they will get their license assigned. You can do some advanced life cycle of your Zoom accounts. For example, if you have teachers who are starting exactly on the day where they should start Zoom, you can configure some life cycle that their accounts might be pre-created few days before the contract starts, so the teacher has the time to test everything and be actually ready when the students come. And of course, as is always with identity management, if you have everything in your identity management, you have all the data in one place. So you can do any reports, you can immediately see how many licenses do you have, which users have license, and so on. So really this unified view on the data may help as well. And all of this, which I just described, is in general applicable to any service, not only on Zoom. But today we are here to talk about Zoom. So let's move to the next part of the presentation, where Andrew and then Jim will present technical demo and some use cases. So what is your, Andrew?
So thank you very much, Slavik, and that's very, very helpful. So I'd like to briefly talk about a demonstration that we had presented back at InCommon 2020 virtual camp. There's some duplication, but the main point I would like to get across is when you get this slide deck and recording of the session, check out this link to the recording. There's some things in the recording that highlight some things that we're not going to show you today that Slavik mentioned, such as directly provisioning a user from midPoint into Zoom, and showing role management, how we can use midPoint to map roles in Zoom, say swap people in and out of the HIPAA groups or what have you. And another important feature that we've demonstrated in that screen recording is the license management, something else you might want to check out. But today, I want to probably kick this back to Jim to kind of show you how we can solve, mainly focusing on that deprovisioning problem and how that can really be solved with the implementation of midPoint. So if you'd like to take it away, Jim.
Great, thank you. Before I start, I'm going to actually give you all an introduction into what I'm about to illustrate and why. The objective here, let's recall, is to illustrate how the Zoom connector with midPoint is going to facilitate deprovisioning, particularly for what we hope in many of your cases will be the issue you're facing with just-in-time provision accounts. Such as what's often done at Zoom for many orgs and enterprises, including higher ed. So what I'll be doing first, you'll see this in a small set of steps, just 3. The first 2 steps, each will be preparing information, preparing a user. In each step, we're going to see 2 users created and then deprovision them. One of those users is going to be created directly within Zoom, and we'll see midPoint automatically pick that user up. The other user will create directly within midPoint, and we'll see that provisioned over to Zoom just as preparation, okay? Either way, the students, in this case, if we want to call them that, are going to receive an invitation email in their inbox and act on it to vouch or verify, rather, the email address and get the user account established. Now, one of the difference that you're hearing me describe here today is that I'm going to be administratively creating these users manually, both within Zoom and within midPoint. Because the level of account, you might recall Andrew speaking about accounts. Our level of account for the Zoom presence I'm going to use today is the Pro level at Zoom, and that level does not have SSO features. You need to level up to business or education in order to get SSO. So because I don't have SSO, I'll be doing user creation manually through the admin consoles, but needless to say, following creation of the user, both directly within Zoom or midPoint, both users become available for management. And that's key here, that they're both available for management, whether done just in time or just in case. So we can do deprovisioning of those users, and it doesn't matter how they got in there. So I just wanted to prepare you for what you'll be seeing here today. So yes, we'll wind up. The third and final step is really what we hope to illustrate for you today, and that's deprovisioning them and how that can be made conveniently, such as we could deprovision one, many, or even all individuals within a role in midPoint and deprovision them that way. So that will be a convenient method for deprovisioning users. And just a hypothetical example, let's say we wanted to deprovision all of last month's graduates from the nursing school. So they would all get deprovision en masse from let's say the HIPAA group at Zoom. So you'll see that today and can see the value that deprovisioning from midPoint and the Zoom connector can offer. One final note, I need to note that I'm going to narrate this demonstration for you live, but you'll be actually watching a recording, and there's two reasons for that. One is a recording allows me to be very uniform in all my audiences for this demonstration, so that's nice. But the second is I've suffered plenty in running into little pitfalls and little hurdles and something not quite working just right. So I think I'm going to spare myself and you today by using a recording. So with that, we can begin. I want to go ahead and start our demonstration, and thank you for that. So thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. And thank you again, Andrew and Slavic, for the great lead up and preparing us with all the background information for our demo. We're going to first take a look at what's within our Zoom presence, and we'll be creating a user eventually here. But the point of user creation, again, is just for illustration. Okay, so we've got a small handful of groups here. I think I'll scroll up so that you can see those groups here in a second. We've got HCC Zoom users, and then we've got one for HIPAA and one for higher ed with recording. Implication of HIPAA is without recording. So you'll see there's a small handful of groups here. We'll go over to the users, and we've got 3 user accounts, a couple of Jonathans and a Sam. Thanks for that, Sam. There's one pending user, but we're going to ignore that. That's not going to be part of our demo today. So we'll switch over and see this same information, hopefully, within our midPoint console. And here's our dashboard, and we want to go to users, list our users, and sure enough, we see both Jonathan's and Sam in here, as well as our midPoint admin account, and that's excluded from our demo and from the Zoom capabilities as well, so you won't see that used here. Now within our roles, we get some out-of-the-box default roles with midPoint, but now you can see roles that map to those groups that we saw earlier. And Andrew mentioned how Zoom groups map to our midPoint roles, so that's what you see there. Okay, so with our users, we're going to conduct an invitation, and I'm going to just enter in an email address I have access to. Need to be make sure that I type this out correctly. I'm known for fat fingering things all the time. So I think that looks good. Yeah, we'll use that. I'm going to do a type basic. That's one of those free accounts. Put them in a group. And we should anticipate an email now, invitation showing up anytime and there it is. So what I'll do here is I'm going to open that up and copy the link. I'm not going to show you the email with the button in it. I'll just copy the link out of here and paste it into a tab, and we'll switch over to that tab, and I'll complete the user acceptance of this invitation. So I'll just set it up with a password and accept those cookies, put in my first, put in my first name correctly, put in a last name here. Let's see. Yeah, that looks good. Start with a password I can remember, I hope, and we'll commit with that. And great, so I now have an enabled account, accepted the invitation. We scroll through here and see it's a fully fledged account. Looks all good to me. So I guess with that, we'll move next. And again, this is just prepping our data. We'll be moving next to showing user creation directly within midPoint and see that provisioned over to Zoom. But I want to take the opportunity here now to invite you to submit questions. You can do that through the questions panel for the control for the webinar. So we strongly encourage you to submit your questions, and we'll see if we can address them here before the end of the presentation today. So thank you for that. While you submit those questions, I'm going to go ahead and start the second step here. So thank you, Sam. So again, what we just saw, what we just witnessed was finishing the creation and confirmation of an account within Zoom. And at the moment, we'll illustrate the view of this new user in the Zoom admin console and corroborate, eventually, we'll corroborate that view that the same user was automatically picked up by midPoint via the Zoom connector. First though, I think what I'm gonna do is, I don't need this. I don't need this view anymore. So I'm gonna log out of here and clean this up and just close this out. I don't need that anymore. So we'll review what's within midPoint. I'm sorry, in Zoom here, and we'll try to see the users. Whoops, and then no, not groups. I want users. So I'll scroll down and I click on users here. Not roles. No, I want users. There we go. So in the users group, now we see that new gym user that we had created moments ago and accepted the invitation. So that's good. Glad that we see that there. I think what we're going to do is go over to midPoint now, and we'll confirm that the individual is there as well. And he is. There's that user automatically picked up by midPoint in the Zoom connector, along with the other Jonathans and Sam. Make sure that this user is in that role assignment. And you can see here the role assignment, just like the group into which we placed that user invitation over on Zoom, that got synced over, so that's good. So I think we're probably ready to go ahead and try doing a user creation for inviting into midPoint. So that's a new user, and I'm going to put in a user ID, something like that. That looks okay. And type in some name information. There we go. Just to discriminate one from the other. That looks good. Got to provide an email address. This is another different address that I need to be very careful typing. Make sure it's the one I have access to as well. And hang on a second. I don't think that doesn't look quite right. I need my glasses. I'm also famous for fat fingering, so forgive me. So I think I'm going to need to make a fix the XCLAMA. XCA. No. All right, that looks okay. Sorry for that. That looks good. Okay. Good. Yeah, I've got that down, right? So last thing is, I think we'll probably finish this guy off and set that to enabled, and then do an assignment. I think I'm going to place this individual into the same role that we did with the Zoom Direct creation. So I'll choose higher ed with recording, put in the same role, and eventually show you deprovisioning from that role. So I think we have this all set up now. So save that, and in just a moment or two, we should expect an email invitation, because that information got provisioned over to Zoom, and Zoom took that, and indeed, there it is. So we can open up that email like we did before, grab that URL and pop it in here, and I'll accept this invitation. And oh, the name information came over. That's cool. And I'll choose a password. There we go. And password again. Hope I did it the same. And we'll commit that guy. And good. So that looked like that worked. So we have now, likewise, a fully fledged account for this direct creation of a user within midPoint. And I think what we want to do here is take another pause, invite you again to consider submitting any questions that you might have through our questions panel in your webinar control. And we'll move next to our third and final stage, which is really the objective we're after here. It's to illustrate deprovisioning using midPoint and the midPoint Zoom connector. So Sam, thank you. I appreciate that. So what we just saw was setting up a couple of users, and we'll now be able to illustrate deprovisioning Zoom users using midPoint and the Zoom connector. Here, we can see from within the Zoom admin console that both users are set up. We can see both those gyms there at the bottom. So what I'm going to want to do is switch over here to the midPoint console, and we have that same list of users as shown in Zoom, right? Both gyms are there, a couple of Jonathans, a Sam, excellent. So so far so good. And now what we're going to do is deprovision maybe this theoretical most recent graduating class en masse. And I'm going to show you that by going down to the role that we have these members in, and select that role and choose members. And today I want to get rid of everybody. So I'm going to select them all, and I'm going to choose delete just because I can. I mean, you can do an unassign, but I'm going to do a deletion, get rid of these guys, and that looks good. Save that, and that took. So I think what we'll do is head over to Zoom and see that things got synchronized over there. We've got, oh, I need to refresh the page, so let me do that. There we go. And indeed, the 2 gym users are now gone. We can even see that they didn't wind up magically in the pending area. They did not. So that illustrates the ease with which the relative convenience of deprovisioning, even manually, as I just showed you, as a midpoint admin. Now imagine being able to use your own group management systems if you have them, and if they're integrated with midpoint as well. You'd be able to manage your groups and your group management systems, and that could propagate through midpoint and then propagate outward from there to Zoom for deprovisioning. So that's our illustration, and I think I'll turn it now back to Slavik.
Thank you, Jim, for this nice demonstration showing us what the connector is capable to do today. And there is even more features with proper configuration in midpoint. So you are, of course, feel free all to try it on your own, for your own Zoom provisioning and deprovisioning. But now I will look a bit ahead into the future and try to describe our vision for a really ideal solution for managing Zoom accounts. So the idea is there that midpoint as identity management will store the users who are just eligible to have an account, but the accounts won't be created right away, but we will do it using just-in-time provisioning using your SSO. So the accounts will be created just in time where the user is actually signing in into Zoom to use it, which will of course save you money for licenses, because the licenses won't be assigned even for those who are eligible to have them until they really start using the Zoom, which is already great. But then when this happens, midpoint will detect which accounts were created, and since then midpoint will update them. So if the, let's say, email or family name of the user will change, midpoint will update this automatically for the users who already have an account created. And of course, midpoint can deprovision users who are no longer eligible. So you have this eligible group or eligible role in midpoint, and if you remove a user, it will be deprovisioned. And if you add a user back in, it won't be provisioned again until he will or she will start using Zoom again. So accounts are only created using just-in-time. So with that, you have kind of guarantee that you are using minimum amount of licenses, and you have strict access control and deprovisioning at the same time. And you can take this even a step forward. And if you are able to integrate midpoint with your access management, let's say with Shibboleth, and Shibboleth can report the timestamp when the user was signing into Zoom, midpoint can store this timestamp and, for example, then detect that an account wasn't used for a month or two and start deprovisioning even that, but still keep the account in this eligible group. So when the user will come again, it will be again provisioned and the license will be used. So this we think is really the ideal solution, and it's something that we are moving forward, and we will be happy to present it in the future when we will be ready to have this. So that was it from our presentation, and I'm passing word back to Andrew to wrap it up.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Slavik, for that kind of wrap up there. Definitely appreciate your time today and helping us out with this webinar. Again, I also wanted to thank Jim for putting together this demo. I think this was pretty awesome and pretty slick. Definitely a great material to have for anybody that wants to distribute it. You're welcome to do that as well. So at this time, I'm going to kind of pick up some of the questions that were presented. I'm going to start with some of I'm going to start with this one. There was a question about, is there a way to set a password in Zoom from midpoint? So to answer that, it should be a yes. We don't actually have that in this demonstration as you've seen, but the Zoom API does in fact support a user's password. I believe that should work just fine. You will still get, the user will still get the email confirmation though, so I believe Zoom will require that account verification step, but setting the password ahead of time, I do believe works. So we had another one that just came in. Does SSO come into play with the password? So yes, it would. If you wanted to mix and match here, where you use potentially the just-in-time provisioning through SSO, the Zoom account would authenticate with the SSO, but the password would of course be managed by your SSO solution. The next question that we have here, the minimum version that the Zoom connector is compatible with. That I'll have to double check on. It would be a restriction based on the version of the ConID framework and what would work in midpoint. I believe we've tested this with version 4 and forward. I do not believe that we've tested it with anything below that. You're welcome to try it. If you have issues with that, feel free to put a suggestion in the GitHub issue log or send us a note. We'd be happy to take a look at it. If we could support going back to an older version, we would do that if it was something simple. So I think we've covered the SSO question. We've covered the password question. The other question was there example midpoint Zoom connector config file available at the GitHub link? There is, although it's not directly obvious from the README. If you drill into the connector repository under source test resources, we actually have some unit tests that we run against the connector, and those configuration files are available in that folder there. An example of how to set up the meta roles and the groups and some template users, and the resource configuration is there as well. If there's something not clear based on those use cases, let us know, submit an issue, or also shoot a note, and we'd be happy to address that. And if we remember, we'll add a link into the README to make that more clear that there is an example there. So I think that was the last question that I'm going to pick up. There's actually another question that was targeted for Slavik, asking if Slavik, if you could please discuss the bullet point for account lifecycle further, just to add some clarification there.
Oh yeah, of course. So midpoint is able to support even more complex life cycles. So for example, grace period. So let's say user is no longer entitled to have an account somewhere, but you want to keep that account for additional week or month in case there are some files that user might want to download or somehow really end accounts on his own terms. So you can easily configure a midpoint to do that. And same way is for example, activation accounts ahead of the time. So if you have account or even the whole user record, which is active from the time, and you have it in the midpoint before with this extra attribute saying valid from exact date, you can configure the lifecycle from some services. The accounts are pre-created there, maybe with some limited rights or even in full rights, and this is all configurable. It really depends on you. And if you want, you can do even more advanced stuff and really have some lifecycle phases like decommissioning of the account or retiring or whatever you need. Really, the midpoint doesn't tell you exactly how the lifecycle should look like, but gives you enough option to configure it for yourself based on your needs.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Slavik. So I believe that's all the questions that we had in the chat box. If you think of anything after this, feel free, please, to send any one of us an email or hit us up on GitHub. There's some convenient links here that we will distribute after this. We're going to send you all an email blast with this attached or linked to this presentation, so you could look at it in the future, and links to the recording of today's session, and also the recordings. They're all linkable here from this slide deck if you want to see that previous recording that we mentioned. Free to check that out. So again, if you have any questions, let us know. We appreciate your time today. We talked about Zoom account provisioning and deprovisioning, how that can be done through midpoint, how you can kind of mix and match SSO and midpoint. how you could use other, other solutions to help as well. And the key takeaway I want to make sure that everybody gets today is that deprovisioning is pretty easy through midPoint once you have that connector set up. So you don't necessarily have to provision through midPoint to be able to provision your Zoom accounts, and this doesn't necessarily always apply to just Zoom as well. Any other connectors can be done this way. So we appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us. Again, grab the links that we'll send out after this, and thanks again.